Did Donald Trump really insult Italy?
Donald Trump's declarations are completely fabricated. I am frankly stunned. But there's one thing he must remember. Italy and I do not beg.
Whoa, that's Giorgia Meloni, Italy's prime minister. You might have seen that video that went viral. It's the latest development in a drama that has Meloni and Trump exchanging unpleasant comments about each other. But it's a rift that cuts much deeper than politicians bickering like children. And it matters for the NATO alliance. But first, here's the gist of what happened so far. The Italian TV station La Sette broadcast this.
Non so cosa dirle. Mi ha implorato di fare una foto con lei. Voleva una foto con me così tanto. L'avrei anche non fatta, ma mi ha fatto pena.
Now, what you just heard there is an Italian voiceover of a phone conversation between Trump and the Italian TV interviewer there, where Trump allegedly said that Giorgia Meloni had begged him for a picture together at the G7 summit in France last week, and that he felt sorry for her. And you earlier heard Meloni's response to that. But Trump didn't walk it back. He posted again on social media. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni asked over and over for a picture with me during the G7 meeting in France. She is doing poorly in Italy with her level of popularity, possibly because she turned down the United States of America when it came to denying Iran from obtaining or developing a nuclear weapon. Well, Meloni replied, "These constant, unprovoked attacks are senseless. As for my popularity, being your friend certainly has not helped it, nor does it depend on my relationship with you. In any case, my popularity is none of your concern. I suggest you focus on yours." Touché. But all this isn't really just about a photo. The real friction goes back to March, when Italy refused to let US bombers use an airbase in Italy to strike Iran. Meloni had insisted on following proper and well-established legal procedure, which includes obtaining parliamentary approval. Trump was furious about that and apparently still is. The fallout is real. Here's Italy's foreign minister.
As you know, unfortunately, there have been very serious and offensive statements made by the President of the United States towards the Italian Prime Minister. I was forced to make the decision to cancel my visit to the United States, scheduled for this coming Monday and Tuesday, because we cannot allow anyone to insult Italy in the way the President of the United States has done.
So, this has been developing in a full-blown diplomatic crisis. Let's dig a bit deeper into this with Alina Trabattoni. She's a journalist in Naples and joins us from there to explain the Italian side of things. Alina, how is this dispute being perceived in Italy?
The average man on the street is taking it quite personally because, there's a lot of hurt, outrage, a sense of betrayal. Some people tell me, the US is an Italian ally, after all. And, as one person said, there is a lot of bickering in these past months in international politics, and it could be considered par for the course. But of course, all it would take is an apology. What's interesting is that this is, starting as a sort of diplomatic personal spat, and so far hasn't had ripple-out effects. And the hope is, as some analysts say, that it won't. But there are two very strong characters involved here. And as one Italian political analyst said to me earlier today when I interviewed him, he said, well, if the geopolitical situation was not so dramatic, it would almost be fun. You'd sit back, put your 3D glasses on, get the popcorn out. But he said, the context this is all happening in is so dramatic that everyone has to take stock and care has to be taken.
Now, Meloni once presented herself quite proudly as one of Trump's closest allies in Europe. Does this spat now look like the failure of that strategy?
Well, yes, of course. Giorgia Meloni was always considered, the European country closest to the US. Also pre-Trump era, And that's simply because also there was a lot of political instability in Europe at the time. You know, we saw in the UK and Germany and France in, you know, the changes in government, et cetera, et cetera. And she was one sort of connecting line through those years. And she was always, you know, touted as the Trump whisperer. And she always did try and walk a very delicate tightrope. Well, it's got to be seen how things develop. Of course, many say that, you know, this is par for the course. Trump tends to, talk to his or, you know, sort of roughen up his allies more than he does his adversaries. I mean, we've seen it with Starmer, with Merz, with Macron, even with Netanyahu. So that also needs to be taken in consideration of. One political analyst said that that's typical of a entrepreneur, of a businessman that goes into politics, and drew some analogies with some of Berlusconi's comments during his time in power.
Now, Trump rather charmingly suggested that Meloni's approval ratings were very low. Are they?
Well, no, actually, they've been going up in past weeks. They did take a strong dip when she introduced the referendum on the constitutional reform tied to the separation of the careers of magistrates and prosecutors, which has been circling around for many years in Italy and is also, you know, a possibility in other European countries. So it was hurt then, but in the past 2-3 weeks, it's been on the rise. To the advantage of Meloni when compared to her centre-left opposition leader and some of her centre-right, extreme right allies. So even compared to Salvini, for example, and the Forza Italia, Berlusconi's traditional Forza Italia party has been level. It hasn't been on the rise or on, you know, the decrease in past weeks. And certainly, her increase, predated any comments made by Trump this time round after the G7. I think they just took a natural hit after the reform, the constitutional reform was not approved by the majority of the population and then went back up.
So why might Meloni then have chosen to hit back so directly this time? And what does that say about her political calculations?
Well, many people I speak to, and again, this is not my personal opinion because I'm a reporter and I report the facts that are on the ground based on, the interactions I have. But many of the political analysts I speak to don't really consider it as much political, action or, carried out due to political calculations, but more a personal one. Because, Trump's, attacks, Trump's, deriding comments on Meloni and on Italy by reflection have been escalating. They started off after Meloni, banned certain uses of the NATO bases, the US bases in Italy, for the Iran conflict. So, she would only allow the ones allowed by the treaties that are currently in place. And then it got even more incandescent after Trump slammed Pope Leo for, intervening on the Middle Eastern crisis, calling for peace. And Meloni, Meloni, along with Italy's president, Mattarella, said that, we cannot attack political leaders for calling for peace, basically, in a nutshell. And it's just escalating. And as some political analysts said to me earlier today, it has a whiff of chauvinism as well. And that's probably also why Meloni reacted, because, Trump has been very hard on Starmer and on Macron, even more so. But, it was some of the comments he made with Meloni were not very nice towards a woman, as it were. So it had that sort of whiff. And as such, she was probably advised also to take a strong stand.
Now, if you take a look into your crystal ball there, how do you think this will pan out? What can we expect in the coming days?
Well, that's a tough one. It's impossible to tell in these sort of situations. What I can say is that Meloni has said she will not comment again, no matter what happens. So presumably that she will stay put. presumably, I mean, we have to see what happens, you know, in terms of interaction and dynamics and communication dynamics. It's interesting. It's all being played out on social media as well, or on television shows. I have to say that the original audio of the interview has not been made public. That seems to be the standard with interviews with US presidents. But, you know, we're all, you know, commenting on a translation of an unverified recording of an interview. But one good thing at the moment is that it shouldn't have wider effects. It could remain limited to sort of political and diplomatic turbulence between Italy and the US, personal and diplomatic turbulence between the Italian president and the US president. Because, you know, fortunately, the negotiations for the tariffs agreements are over, and there's only the upcoming vote for the 15% tariffs for the EU.
Alina Trabattoni there, journalist in Naples. Many thanks for your reporting, Alina.
Thank you, guys.
And now let's look at the international perspective with Matteo Garavoglia. He's a professor of practice at Tsinghua University, Beijing, and also a senior research associate at the University of Oxford. Matteo, Meloni and Trump were seen as close, Meloni being one of the few European leaders that seemed to click with Trump. Is this whole spat now really bad for European influence in Washington?
I would say that, influence is important, but actually access is really what matters. Meloni had styled herself as a bridge between Europe and the Trump administration. And now this bridge has collapsed. This, I think, presents more problems for Meloni domestically than for the Europeans as a whole, in that whilst in the early stages of the new administration, Europeans were trying to work through Meloni, this had already stopped being the case for some time.
Now, an increasing number of European leaders have been increasingly vocal in criticizing Donald Trump. Germany's Merz recently, but also Macron and Starmer had their spats with Trump. Is that a trend, do you think, that European leaders are realizing that you can't rely on Trump anyway, no matter how much you try and please him?
Well, I think they're shifting from trust-based to transaction-based diplomacy. European leaders increasingly assume that commitments must be reinforced by interest and not personal assurances. Here, the lesson is continuity that cannot depend on personalities. Governments are trying to build relationships that can survive electoral cycles and leadership changes. And Europe is preparing for unpredictability, not abandoning the alliance. Here, the goal is to edge against uncertainty while preserving the transatlantic relationship.
Now, could this public pushback from a normally Trump-friendly leader like Meloni end up strengthening Europe's collective bargaining position?
I do believe that here the core is that unity is far more valuable than privileged access, and a coordinated European position often carries more weight than individual leaders seeking, special relationships. Trump negotiates with strength, and fragmentation invites pressure. So a divided Europe is easier to pressure than a bloc speaking with one voice. So I would say that a tougher Meloni can be more useful to Europe than a friendly Meloni in that respect. Demonstrating independence may enhance our credibility, both in Europe and in Washington.
Now, Meloni was seen, as we know, as one of Trump's closest NATO allies in Europe. If even that relationship is fraying, what does that say about the state of the Transatlantic Alliance right now?
Well, it tells us that personal chemistry cannot overcome structural disagreements. There are differences over trade, defense spending, strategic priorities. Eventually, all these outweigh individual relationships. The alliance is becoming less sentimental and more transactional. So shared interests still matter, but they're increasingly framed in terms of cost and benefits. I think what is crucial to remember is that strong alliances survive tensions, while weak alliances try to avoid tensions. And so these agreements are not necessarily a sign of collapse of institutions that remain resilient beyond personalities.
Now, do you think this is just temporary, or could it have longer-term consequences for the relations between Meloni and Trump, and also US-Europe relations?
Personal disputes fade, but strategic adjustments endure in that respect. So political tensions may pass, but changes in defense and economic policy can last for years or decades. So within this context, I think that every crisis accelerates Europe's search for autonomy. And this repeated uncertainty encourages Europeans to invest more in their own capabilities. Here, the biggest consequences may be psychological rather than diplomatic. Confidence in the permanence of American commitments may be changing more than formal policies when we look at this latest spat in that respect.
Now, we have a NATO summit coming up in Ankara in Turkey in just about 2 or 3 weeks. Is there a risk that this personal dispute spills into the substance of NATO's agenda on that summit rather than staying a sideline story?
The real danger is not the drama, it's distraction. Public political clashes can divert attention from critical security decisions that require consensus. So defense spending remains the substance behind the headlines here. The underlying debate is still about burden sharing and military readiness, not personal relationships. If trust erodes, then every budget debate becomes harder. So even technical negotiations become more difficult when political confidence between allies declines.
Professor Matteo Garavoglia there, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That's it from us for now. Please let us know what you think about this Trump-Meloni dust-up down here in the comments. And while you're at it, why not give us a like and hit the subscribe button? We really appreciate that. For now, it's goodbye from me and the crew here in Berlin. Thanks.